This is Post Commander of the SSC American Legion, John Ludwick. As young Americans, we're thrilled to hear your story and record it so we and future generations will be able to understand and learn from your experiences in the military.
Okay.
I'm Sophia Hanna. I'm a sophomore at South Sioux City High School.
I'm Anna Guzman and I'm a freshman.
You're a freshman?
Yes.
I am Valerie Rosales and I'm a sophomore.
Sophomore?
All right, and I think we're kind of just going to go into the questions.
Valerie, Stephanie, and
Anna.
Aniki. Okay.
I'm Sophia.
Sophia, that's right.
All right.
See what you'll have to look for when you get old.
All right. Where did you live before you were entered the service?
I was in western Nebraska, around the Scottsbluff area when I entered the service. So, as you can see, I still haven't given up my cowboy ways yet. So, yes, I entered the service. I served with the United States Army, a special forces group known as the Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol. I first did time in the Middle East. We were temporarily stationed in Europe before we went into the Middle East during one of the many Middle East crises in the 60s. Of course, you kids weren't around then, but they had the Arab-Israeli War. Have you ever studied that in '67? Well, the tensions were still thick enough, the air was still thick enough to cut with a knife, probably still are. So we first went in, got into Jordan and Haifa. I got to look down the mouth of the Valley of Armageddon, and at the age of 18, thinking we might be firing the first shots of the last battle of the last war wasn't cool. From that point, we were shipped to Vietnam. So we served there I served with the 25th Infantry Division. We were stationed at a place called Cu Chi, and that was part of the Iron Triangle, Cu Chi, Ben Hoa, Tay Ninh. And that was the southern tip of the Ho Chi Minh Trail at Tay Ninh, so we're right on the Cambodian border. So I patrolled enough jungle. I saw all the jungle I ever wanted to see in my lifetime. So, all right, any questions or any comments or?
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
Well, both. I had some lanky Texan send me a personal invitation to join the Viet Cong Hunting Club. So I just went ahead and me and my buddies just went ahead and signed up and got in and got it over with. We figured, yep. So.
What were some of your duties?
Well, I was an infantryman. We were also with a long-range recon. We were intel, engagement. Basically, we patrolled, sent back information to headquarters, letting them know where enemy movements were. And many times we sat out there in an 8-man team and didn't speak to each other. We were spread out, wouldn't speak to each other for 3 days. You had to be totally, absolutely quiet. And not easy to do. And there's nights in the jungle, spooky. I remember coming back, having to turn on a nightlight for a few nights. So, how many, most of you here are 14, 15, 18? Any 18 years old? 18? Yes. That's what I was doing when I was 18. I did my senior trip overseas. So, well, I'm sure you have questions of some kind.
Did you form any friendships when you were overseas?
Yes, we did. I still have. There's me and a friend from Nanny Glo, Pennsylvania. We're the last two alive of our original 8-man squad.
Do you keep in contact with them?
Yep. Send Christmas cards. Make a phone call once in a while, see how they're doing. And yep, I do. There's a bond in the military. Anybody that'll serve together, you may not see anybody, you might even see each other or hear from them for 20 years. As soon as you run back into them, it's just like the years melt away. It's an exclusive club. Especially, not only if you serve, but especially in combat, when you have literally walked the edge of hell together. So.
What did you do for recreation or when you were off duty?
Well, when we were in Europe for the while, before we went, we got to take a few passes. I got to see Paris and Holland and a couple other things. It was kind of nice to get around there. So I did get to see a little of Europe that way. Other places I went, when I was in Vietnam, we had an R&R. I went to Australia. That's a nice place to go. Stopped to see Hawaii. Stopped in Japan. But yeah, it's one thing about the service. You will see the world, depending on what your military obligation of service is.
Where were you when the war ended?
I was in Wahoo, Nebraska. I owned a small fleet of trucks. I was in the business at the time. And the war ended in 1975. That's what I was doing then.
When you came back from service, were there any protests or anything?
Some, especially on the West Coast and East Coast. Not so much here. There were some here. But Nebraska is more of a conservative. The Midwest, farm values, you know, that kind of agriculture, the branches. So you didn't get so much of that here. But yeah, we called us baby killers. You know, some of them try to throw like animal blood or something on you. That kind of thing. You know, it was kind of a turmoil. Country was in turmoil in the 60s. And a lot of it brought on by opposition, homegrown. Unfortunately, some of these were Marxist, communist. See, Vietnam, and one thing you kids have to understand, Vietnam was not lost on the battlefield. It was lost here at home. That's where it was lost. Matter of fact, two of Ho Chi Minh's generals had just about had enough and they were ready to give up. But they knew they had their subversives here in the United States could keep plugging away and give them, at least encourage them to keep fighting. Because by the time I'd gotten over there, we figured out all their plans with their tunnels. See, where I served in that Iron Triangle, that was probably the most tunnels and that kind of thing in Vietnam. We call it Hobo Woods or Ambush Alley, that kind of thing. We have nicknames for it.
What did you think was the most difficult part about serving over there?
Well, you were over there fighting for a cause. Behind you, you know, the country wasn't backing you up. That was the worst part. Half the time we didn't know who the enemy was, and when we came home, half the time we didn't know who our friends were. So it was kind of a tumultuous time in America at that time. And a lot of memories, of course, have faded over the years. There were people who were alive then, my age. You know. So, but the thing of it is, there's always going to be a bad guy. Now, I'm not going to teach a Sunday school class here, but there's a God and there's a Satan. And as long as there's a Satan, there's always going to be a bad guy. General George S. Patton told his troops after the Second World War, he says, "Gentlemen, if you think you've wiped the last tyrant off the face of the earth, you haven't. Every generation breeds a new one." And it's true. So.
How did wartime experience affect your life?
Yeah, it caused a lot of trouble. We would try to concentrate on doing other things, trying to outrun the war. And it caused a lot of strife, marriages, that kind of thing. I lost my first marriage over it, and I still regret that. But I'm married to a good woman now, and so.
Were there any regiments that you had in the military that kind of carried over into your life back home?
Well, certain disciplines, yeah. Certain disciplines. Military, of course, farm boys are disciplined anyway, at least back then. We got out of bed in the morning, we kept a time schedule. You know, even if we came in late at night, we still had to be up at 5 in the morning to take care of the cattle. So that, and of course, the military is regimented. They call reveille, they call chow, you know. So.
Did you receive any specialized training?
Well, yeah, in special forces, sneak attacks, we used to do a thing called stay-behind missions, where after the main body moved back, we would stay behind and wait for the enemy to come in, and then come out of the jungle screaming like a bunch of banshees, because even a small group of men can create a lot of confusion to a large group if they don't know they're out there. Then we bring the force back in.
When you were in the military, how did you keep in touch with your family and friends back home?
By letter. We didn't have email and YouTube, no. No. Matter of fact, when I was overseas in Vietnam, I could take this piece of paper or the top off my ration box. All I had to do was address it and sign a note and send a letter to my folks at home, and the military would mail it without a stamp. So they were good about that. And one time I got to call home, and that's because we did a mission into Cambodia. Well, we got into a firefight. We had a radio man. He didn't kill the radio man, but he shot the radio, so we couldn't communicate. So we had the North Vietnamese army here, the Americans here. We're in the middle, and they don't know, neither one knows we're out here. They can't call and tell anybody, so we just had to wait it out. But after a certain time, the military has to, of course back then they sent by Western Union, let us know that we were missing in action, which upset my mother terribly. But then when we made our way back to the post, or back to the base camp, the fire base, they gave us a 2-day in-country R&R in China Beach. And from there I was able to call, but back then you picked up as an overseas phone, overseas radio. So if I called, I'd say, Sophia, right? I'd say, hi Sophia, over, and you'd have to say, hi John, over, and that's back and forth. And I could not, and of course they monitored the radio because I could not answer any questions of where I was at, what I had done, or anything like that. That was all, you couldn't know those things. That was all secure. And, so no, we didn't have FaceTime and all that stuff then. Most of it was all done by letter. Mail call was a big thing. So that was our only communication with home.
Where were all the different places that you went when you were overseas?
Overseas, passing through Japan, got to see Australia and R&R, of course Vietnam, Thailand, or not Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, mostly in that. I didn't get to the Philippines or anything like that. We flew by them when I was on our way to Australia. And that was what we called a military hop. It wasn't a commercial plane, we just grabbed a military hop. So, and overseas in Europe, of course, like as I said, we got like a 2-day pass or something. We could go to Paris, take a train to Holland. Europe is big, but as countries, the countries aren't as, so you could cross from Germany into France or in Holland or wherever. You know. Except for at that time, we still had the Iron Curtain, so you couldn't cross into the communist blocks. So I've been to Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. We used to go to a place called Grafenbier, and that's where Hitler trains his SS troops. And that was right on the border with Czechoslovakia. And on the free side, which Germany's still a socialist nation, but still, people had little gardens planted, and you'd walk up and down shops, shop and that kind of. Then you'd sit on your tank looking back over and watching the Russians looking back on their tanks, looking right back at you. Over there, there was nobody moving around. You didn't see gardens. Buildings were in disrepair. Every now and then you'd watch and wait for the government truck to show up and give them their rations of food for the week. So if you lived there at the time, you'd spend half your husband's paycheck on 5 pounds of hamburger, a couple loaves of bread, and a gallon of milk. So, anybody tells you that socialism or communism or Marxism is all about equality, yes it is. You're all equally poor. That's the only way they can make it. It's just, all that is, it's this mutually shared poverty. That's all it is. And misery, equally shared misery. They promise a world that they can't deliver.
What are some of the memories you have from your experiences?
The good ones, friends I made, places we've been together. And of course, we go out and of course, blow off a little steam out with our buddies, you know. Didn't get carried away, so we got in trouble. Didn't spend any time in the, didn't spend any time in the lockup or anything. But, the bad, you know, this having one of your best friends die in your arms, those are the bad memories. I know sometimes, thank the good Lord, I remember walking a patrol. We did not walk the berms of the rice paddies because that's where the mines were. And so we'd walk out in the mud. And of course we have our, what we call rut sacks. We had all of our supplies on there. Everybody carried a belt for the M60 machine gun, belt of ammunition, plus our own rifles, and get caught out in the middle and get opened up by machine gun fire from the enemy. So, and I'm telling you, war pictures, when those bullets are exploding the ground and the water around you, that's a whole different. I remember I ran out across all that mud. I must have set a track record. It's amazing what a 19-year-old kid can do in AAA physical condition when you're in adrenals and overdrive. So, still amazed. I look back on that thinking, boy, I was a bad dude then. I'm still in good shape now. So, yes. Anybody planning on going into the military? Now keep in mind, guys, we're not trying to scare you here. You have a 1 million times greater chance of being killed in an automobile accident than you will in a combat zone. Always keep that in mind. So be careful when you drive or when you're about to drive, you're about to learn.
What have you done since separating from the military?
Well, I started a business. My Uncle Bob was already in business, so I went in with him. And then when he retired, I took the business over. We had a trucking business. And but then the government decided we shouldn't be making the kind of money we were making, so they so-called deregulated that industry, which it really hasn't recovered from since. So basically, truck driving jobs used to be in the professional column of the classified ads. Now you find them in general help. See, that's where the money went, so that's where the profession went. I don't care if it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. When you deprive money on a marketplace like that, what are you going to end up with? They decided to take the baseball, like the Houston Astros won the World Series, that's correct?
Yeah.
Say, okay, you guys aren't going to get a $10 million contract, you get paid $25,000 a year. What kind of ball players would you get? You'd have to let the market, not the government, set the tone. The market will only, they'll only take so much. When the market can't stand anymore, then they're done. But you have to let the markets work. And the government decided that they wanted to be the market. That never works. That never works. You're going to find that out with Obamacare. The fiasco that nonsense is. And I'm not going to get political either, but that's just the way it is. Governments don't do things. You know, when our founding fathers set the country up, they only gave the federal government 18 things to do, knowing full well that if the government did 5 of them well, we'd be lucky. At last count, to my knowledge, the federal government's into 2,109 things. And still you can't name 5 things they do well. So why would you give them more responsibility? Why would you do that? Sadly, too many people think the federal government's the answer. It ain't gonna happen, kids. That's why our founding fathers try to keep most government local, our county and state. That's where you get most of this job, that's where most of the job is done. Yep. So.
When you were overseas, did you ever attend any sort of church, or was there any
Yes,
setup?
we always had our chaplains. Yes. When we could make it. Sometimes the chaplains would come out into the field. And if you were, now I was Protestant, or well, basically Baptist, we'd have that one, we'd have a Catholic priest, a rabbi, if they were Jewish, sure. So they made sure that, their spiritual needs were met.
Are you a member of any veteran organizations?
Yes, I'm post commander of American Legion 307 here in South Sioux. So I'm kind of the head honcho, but for now anyway. So, but I have a good group of veterans that work with me, and that makes the job a lot easier when you can delegate responsibility. You don't have to worry if it's done or not. It's always, when you get a group of people like that, that's what makes the bond like that. Makes a bond. When you have people you can trust, they trust you, you trust them, it just gets done. So we've run into some difficult situations, maybe at the last minute, and but we've always managed to pull it off just because we pulled together, made up a plan of attack, and executed it. So you guys that like mine work together, get a lot done.
What sort of activities does the American Legion do or run?
Well, like this here, we also do our oratorials coming up this Sunday, as a matter of fact. We also have fundraisers for, matter of fact, Jackson Legion. There's a couple that have a baby that has some kind of leukemia, year-old. They're having a supper, a donation supper, to raise money to help those folks with hospital bills, travel expenses, and so on and so forth. Of course, Veterans Day at the Wall on the Freedom Park. We conduct services there. We'll be doing the Pete's Feeders, or whatever they call that. What do they call it? I still call it Pete's Feeders. What do they call it now?
I don't know. They make the food for the
poor.
For the poor, yeah.
Yeah, we'll be out there. You'll see us out in
The
the
soup kitchen.
yeah.
South soup version.
Yeah, the South Sioux version, right. So you'll see us out on Dakota Avenue here in the next few days, within a week or so, I guess. And it's like everything else. Pennies, nickels, dimes, dollars, it all helps. It all helps. Because a few here and a few there can make a big pile after a while, right?
Yeah, Cardinal baskets.
Cardinal, that's it, Cardinal baskets. I still call, that's what it's always
Yeah,
called,
Pete's
yeah.
Feeders, yeah.
A lot of people still know it by Pete's Feeders, yeah.
How did you return home?
How did I return home? Well, there's an organization called Flying Tigers that did that for the military. So they flew us out and flew us back. They had a contract with the military to fly us anywhere in the world that we were needed. Once we got to the bases, then we went from there, and we moved by military.
Where did you live when you came right back?
I stayed in Lincoln for a while. Like I say, I wasn't married, didn't even have a girlfriend. I didn't want no parts of that until I got back from the service. So I needed some transportation, so I went down to Omaha, Jim Art Chrysler Plymouth, and bought the car to buy then. The car to have then was the Plymouth Roadrunner. That was the one to have. And I bought a brand new Plymouth Roadrunner and paid cash for it because I'd saved up money while I was in the service. Put my little temporary sticker in the back window and laid 2 virgin patches of Goodyear polyglass rubber on the street, L Street, as I left the dealership. I still own that car, by the way. So then I try to get on with our lives.
What was your job when you came back?
Well, I started in transportation with my Uncle Bob, and then just went from there. So between cattle and trucking, agriculture and the trucking industry are the 2 most important professions in the country, because somebody has to grow the food, somebody has to ship it. And trains and planes and ships can only go so far, but without the trucking industry, nothing else moves. And that's the sad part about it, why the industry's been run down the way it has, because that's the main supply route. Before that, it was buckboards and 20 mule teams. You remember borax soap. That's way before your time. Remember the 20 mule team?
I do, yeah.